Hello, everyone. My name is Sasha Parrish. I'm the publishing assistant for Diversity MBA Media. I'm joined today by Michael Wheeler, the president of Michael Wheeler Diversity. Hi, Michael. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us more about your organization?
Hi, I'm delighted to be here. I've been doing diversity, equity, inclusion work for my entire professional career. So it's both personal passion and commitment. I feel very fortunate to be able to do this as my profession, really. And as you mentioned, I'm president of Michael Wheeler Diversity, a consulting firm specializing in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've worked as an executive inside companies. I worked at the conference board for many years, where I established your center of expertise on diversity, equity, inclusion, which included research and annual conference and diversity executive councils. So I've been doing this a long time, and the article we're going to talk about today is really kind of a culmination of over 2 decades of experience and work and inspiration.
Wow. So yes, as you mentioned, Michael wrote an article for us at Diversity Business Review for the inaugural issue. His article is entitled Diversity Performance Factors, DPFs, trademark, a paradigm for performance and transformation. Michael, would you like to tell us more about your article?
Sure. So the initial idea for this concept, diversity performance factors, which is really a paradigm and a process, came about quite a few years ago when I was doing some research, and I recognized some what I called gaps, between what was sometimes espoused versus what was needed. And it also grew out of a recognition that when you really go down this path of diversity, equity, inclusion, it can get really complex,
Right.
Because you're talking about every dimension: race, gender, sexual orientation, disabilities, and all the things that go with that. And, I just observed the challenge for people in their everyday work, many with really good intentions, but sometimes feeling overwhelmed, and even executives feeling overwhelmed. So what grew out of that was really kind of a focus on some specificity, on action, so more doing rather than telling, and really putting something tangible in front of people that they could walk through a process, through a dialogue, and learn by doing, while actually creating some real positive interventions, identifying issues, and getting more specificity on the goals that they wanted to achieve. I call it a paradigm for performance and transformation, thinking about organizations and people and the work they have to do every day, and kind of also just putting in the context of what they do every day. So you're really addressing some global issues, but in the context of what people do every day. And that's also their spheres of influence and where they can make a difference. And ideally that spreads out to the world. So again, kind of taking a lot of complexity, bringing it to some simplicity and specificity. So when I mentioned the term diversity performance factors, that came about really as understanding very specific factors that are often left out in most business literature, whether it's management, performance, whatever. As you think about dimensions of diversity, again, whether it's race, gender, ethnicity, there are very specific things to any group that's been marginalized, for example, but also specific. Racism is a very specific issue, and that has real issues for performance, for individuals, for groups, and ultimately for organizations. It gets in the way. It's a problem. For people, disabilities are unique issues. So the idea of having performance factors is being able to identify a lot of what we already know about each of those issues, understanding how they come into play in what we do and how we do it every day in our organizations, and what we can do to eradicate those things, to create a space where people really truly can thrive in organizations.
Right. In your article, you mentioned that certain diversity performance factors, or DPFs, are enablers and some are performance enhancers. Can you expand on that?
So enablers, in part, is the absence of barriers.
Right.
So part of the process is identifying what the barriers are and eliminating those. But the enablers are creating those things that help people thrive. And, you know, it can be very simple in some ways, but actually in practice can be more complex. But for example, there's a study in Harvard Business Review that talked about respect is the most important factor for performance for people in organizations, being respected. So if you look at that from a diversity angle, ensuring you really truly have a workplace of respect, not just in word, but in behaviors. And one of the ways to do that, there's work by Mary Rowe on micro inequities and micro affirmations, and I really like her work because she addresses those things like microaggressions that people experience in the workplace, and those get in the way, but she has an answer to that, micro affirmations. And when we're affirming people, affirming who they are, affirming the work they do, affirming their capabilities, being respectful to them is another form of affirmation. You can't do the other things. You can't do the micro inequities. So that's one example of an enabler. I think kind of behaviorally, attitudinally, how we do what we do. And I'd say another enabler, you know, a good example to use, unconscious bias, implicit bias is a very hot topic in organizations, but really systemically looking at processes and practices and eliminating bias, ensuring you have checks and balances in place to enable people through a process. For example, I was working with an organization on calibrations and just simply talked about potential biases that come into the play in that process, and having those doing the process talk about their own biases, organizational biases, and eliminating those. So in this case, an enabler was simply installing a slide in the PowerPoint deck that was a stop-gap measure to mitigate bias, or interrupt bias, as some say. I kind of like that term. Let's interrupt it. So by interrupting bias, you're creating enablers that remove those barriers.
Right. Thank you. The article also introduces us to the DPF processing model. And can you walk us through some of those core tenets within the model, which I know works to address the root causes in DPF?
Right. So it's basically a 6-step model. And the idea was, you know, kind of inspired by Stephen Covey, start with the end in mind. So, yeah, I can come in and talk about diversity topics, and there's absolutely a place for that. You know, back to unconscious bias, for example. But where it really comes to life is this process is designed to, first of all, engage people, engage a diverse group of people, engage the stakeholders in your organization and that process. So the step one is taking an organizational objective and talking about it. So, you know, if we want to design a new product, we sit down and say, okay, we want to design a new product that serves a certain, you know, will help expand our place in the marketplace. You identify that specific goal, whatever that product might be, could be, and then have a conversation. Okay, what is diversity? Simply a question, what does diversity have to do with this? When you're talking to a diverse group, you get answers really quickly. And you can get specific and say, what about for women? What about for Black people? What about for people with disabilities? And you start getting some of the specific diversity performance factors that I mentioned earlier, but they come to life. People share them in real time through life experience, through work experience. You start identifying those. And the other piece you talk about, next step, is really what gets in the way. You know, and it might be lack of representation. We don't have the voices in the room that we should have. So you can identify that kind of issue. We have biases in place that are getting in the way of hearing people, of people participating. So identify those, and then you say, okay, what's working? What are the benefits that we have or that we could create by being more thoughtful? And you know, a company might say, hey, we have employee resource groups, but we haven't tapped into them. Let's tap into them more for our product design process. And companies are doing that. but they're not all doing that. So that's one example of something you have in place, but also recognizing by having that conversation, you start identifying the benefits of diverse perspectives on designing a product.
Right.
The next step is once you've identified those factors, and just kind of think of it a brainstorm. I've done this quickly. It can be done, in an hour pretty easily, or you can go really deep. But the idea is to get people started talking, and then you identify what are the interventions we need, the tactics we need to take to eliminate barriers or potential barriers. What are the things we need to do, reinforce what we have in place or to enable people to be successful? And then what are we trying to achieve? What's it going to look like when we've done that? So really, the outcomes are both how have we changed our processes to be more inclusive? How have we changed our processes to eliminate barriers? What does that look tactically, behaviorally, process-wise? And what do we want the outcomes to be? So at the end of the day, for a new product, it might be a truly innovative product, a product that's really inclusive. It might talk about the marketing of that product. You could go on. But at the end of the day, it really helps people get specific about, we have a goal. This is what diversity has to do with it. This is how we can enhance it. And this is what it's going to look like when we achieve, how we're going to get there, and when we get there.
Awesome. That is so great and so helpful, I think now, especially that so many companies are looking to see what they can do to be more diverse and really address diversity within their organizations. And that's a really helpful model. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for your insights. If any of our listeners would like to read Michael's article, you can find it on diversitybusinessreview.com, along with many other articles and podcasts. You can also visit michaelwheelerdiversity.com to learn more about DPFs and Michael's organization. Before we go, do you have any closing remarks?
Yeah, I'll just close with some of the core tenets around this topic, because I think if you think about these, and they're in the article, will help you no matter what you do. And one is to think about diversity as being integral to everything you do. Yvette Bowden, who used to head diversity for United Airlines, said, diversity is a value stream that impacts every way we do business and interact with people. It's about business or organizational processes open to diversity, not just the diversity process. As I talk about a paradigm shift, that's a big, I think, paradigm shift, really looking at your organizations as the template. Being clear on what you want to achieve, both with diversity and relative to the organization you're in. Engaging stakeholders is a motto from the people with disabilities community. It says, not about us, without us. And I got to tell you, one too many times over my career, I've seen people making decisions that affect other people, and the stakeholders aren't in the room. So make sure the stakeholders are in the room. There is a lot of complexity. If you can create a little simplicity, so this model I just shared with you does that. It creates something tangible. You don't stop there, but it's a good starting point, and it helps people think systemically. Again, just minimize, remove barriers, maximize the things that help people. And, equity is really important factor in this, in helping people be successful. Not everybody's the same. And there's a lot to offer in looking at different ways of getting to where we want to go. So those are some key thoughts around that. I thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Great. For all of our listeners, be sure to join us again and subscribe to our channel for more diversity, equity, and inclusion insights. Thank you so much, Michael. I hope you enjoy the rest of your